The dust-laden wind howled through the lonely streets of Redemption, Colorado, carrying with it the scent of desperation and unfulfilled promises as Judith Evans stared at the empty plate before her. The gnawing hunger in her stomach, a cruel reminder of how quickly life could change. The summer of 1878 had brought nothing but sorrow to Judith. At 28, she found herself alone in a world that had little mercy for widows. 3 months had passed since she had buried her husband Thomas after a stray bullet from a saloon brawl had found its unintended mark in his chest. The small ranch they had worked together now felt like an impossible burden, too heavy for her shoulders alone. Judith's dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her once vibrant blue eyes now dulled by grief and worry. The small wooden table in her kitchen seemed to stretch endlessly before her, emphasizing the emptiness that had become her life. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the parched land. The drought had killed most of her crops, and the few chickens she kept had stopped laying eggs weeks ago. "One more day," she whispered to herself, tracing the grain of the wooden table with her finger. "Just one more day, and then I'll figure something out." It had become her mantra, a promise she made each morning as she watched her meager supplies dwindle. The sound of hoofbeats outside drew her attention. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially with nothing but bad news spreading about the drought. Judith rose from her chair, smoothing down her faded blue dress before stepping onto the porch. A tall figure on horseback approached, the sun at his back casting him in shadow. As he drew closer, Judith could make out a lean, weathered man with sandy brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He tipped his hat when he saw her. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice warm and deep. "Name's Lucas Lawson. I'm looking for the Evans Ranch. Would this be it?" "It is," Judith replied cautiously. "I'm Judith Evans." "What brings you here, Mr. Lawson?" Lucas dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Up close, Judith could see he was probably in his early 30s with a face tanned by the sun and a small scar above his right eyebrow. "I was a friend of Thomas's," he explained, leading his horse closer. "We rode together for the Callahan outfit some years back. I only just heard about his passing when I came through Redemption. Thought I'd come pay my respects and see if there was anything you might need." The mention of Thomas sent a fresh wave of grief through Judith. "That's kind of you, Mr. Lawson, but I'm managing just fine." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Lucas glanced around the property, taking in the withered fields and the disrepair of the barn. His eyes were observant but not judgmental. "I understand, madam. Still, I'd be obliged if you'd let me water my horse before I head back to town." Judith nodded, grateful that he hadn't pressed the issue. "Of course. The well's around back. It's running low, but there's enough." While Lucas tended to his horse, Judith returned inside, embarrassment washing over her as she looked at the bare table. She had nothing to offer a guest, not even a cup of coffee. When a knock came at the door minutes later, she hesitated before answering. Lucas stood there, his hat in his hands and a bundle tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Evans, I hope you don't mind, but I brought some supplies from town. Nothing much, just some bread and preserves. Thought maybe we could share a meal while you tell me about Thomas's last years." Judith's pride warred with her hunger. "Mr. Lawson, I can't accept, please," he interrupted gently. "Thomas once saved my life during a cattle stampede. I owe him more than I can ever repay. Let me do this small thing." There was something in his eyes, a sincerity that broke through Judith's defenses. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Thank you," she said softly. Lucas set his bundle on the table and unwrapped it, revealing a fresh loaf of bread, a jar of blackberry preserves, some dried beef, and a small sack of coffee beans. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "It's more than enough," Judith replied, moving to the stove to prepare the coffee. As they sat together at the table that had felt so empty just moments before, Judith found herself sharing stories about Thomas' good memories that had been overshadowed by grief. Lucas listened attentively, occasionally offering anecdotes from their time working together. "He talked about you often," Lucas said as they finished their simple meal. "Said he'd found the best part of himself when he found you." Tears sprang to Judith's eyes. "I miss him terribly." "Of course you do," Lucas nodded, understanding in his gaze. He glanced out the window at the setting sun. "It's getting late. I should head back to town." Judith walked him to the door, a strange reluctance filling her at his departure. "Thank you for the meal, Mr. Lawson, and for the memories of Thomas." Lucas put his hat on and nodded. "Mrs. Evans, I'm staying in town for a while. If you need anything at all, you just send word to the Redemption Hotel." After he left, Judith stood on the porch watching his figure disappear into the dusk, the emptiness of the house behind her somehow more pronounced than before. 3 days later, Judith woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and hurried outside to find Lucas repairing her barn roof, his shirt already soaked with sweat despite the early hour. "Mr. Lawson," she called up to him. "What are you doing?" He paused in his work, wiping his brow with his forearm. "Morning, Mrs. Evans. Hope I didn't wake you too early. Noticed this roof was about to give way when I was here the other day. Figured I'd come fix it before the next rain makes things worse." "You didn't have to do that," she said, confused by his kindness. Lucas climbed down the ladder and stood before her. "I know I didn't have to, wanted to though." He gestured toward a wagon she hadn't noticed before. "Brought some supplies too, seed for planting once the drought breaks, some feed for your chickens. There's groceries in there as well." Judith felt her face flush with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "I can't pay you for any of this." "Not asking for payment," Lucas replied simply, "just being neighborly." "But why?" she pressed, needing to understand his motivation. Lucas looked at her directly, his hazel eyes honest and clear. "Because Thomas would have done the same for my wife if our situations were reversed." He paused, then added quietly, "She passed 2 years ago. Fever took her." Understanding bloomed in Judith. This wasn't charity, it was the solidarity of shared loss. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "Thank you," he nodded. "Now, how about some breakfast before I get back to that roof? I brought eggs and bacon." Over the next few weeks, Lucas became a regular presence at the Evans ranch. He arrived early each morning and worked until dusk, repairing fences, cleaning out the well, and preparing the fields for when the rains would finally come. Judith, initially uncomfortable with accepting so much help, began to look forward to his company. They fell into an easy routine. Judith would prepare meals from the supplies Lucas brought, and they would eat together, sharing stories of their lives. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his years as a cowhand for various outfits across the territory, about his brief marriage to a schoolteacher named Mary who had died before they could start a family. Judith found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone. Not even Thomas. Her dreams of becoming an artist before practicality had led her to marriage, her secret fear that she would never be enough for this harsh land. Her guilt at feeling relieved that she and Thomas hadn't had children who would now be left fatherless. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lucas turned to her. "Judith," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I've been thinking about heading north soon. There's word of work in Wyoming, and the drought shows no signs of breaking here." A hollow feeling spread through Judith's chest. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "When will you leave?" "That depends," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've grown fond of this place and of you. I know it's too soon after Thomas, and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I thought maybe you might consider coming with me. We could sell this land, start fresh somewhere new." Judith's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "Just think about it. Wyoming's beautiful country with plenty of rain and good soil. We could build something there." That night Judith couldn't sleep. Lucas's proposition swirled in her mind. The idea of leaving the ranch, the only home she'd known for years, terrified her. But staying meant fighting a losing battle against the drought and her dwindling resources, And then there was Lucas himself. She had grown to care for him more than she wanted to admit. His quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, the way his eyes lit up when he smiled, all of it had worked its way into her heart despite her determination to honor Thomas's memory. Morning found her still awake, her decision made. When Lucas arrived, she was waiting on the porch. "I can't go with you," she said without preamble. "This is my home. Thomas and I built it together, and I can't just abandon it." A shadow passed over Lucas's face, but he nodded. "I understand. I wouldn't want you to do anything that didn't feel right." "But," Judith continued, taking a deep breath, "I would like it very much if you would stay. Not out of obligation or pity, but because you want to be here, with me." The smile that broke across Lucas's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." That evening, as they sat at the table sharing a meal of rabbit stew and the last of the bread Lucas had brought weeks ago, a distant rumble of thunder broke the silence. "Could it be?" Judith whispered, rising from her chair. They rushed outside just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, the rain was pouring down, soaking the parched earth and their upturned faces alike. Lucas turned to Judith, rain streaming down his features, and in a moment of pure joy, he pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss tasted of rain and promise, of endings and beginnings all wrapped together. The drought broke that night, and with it, the last of the barriers between them. By November, the Evans Ranch, now the Evans Lawson Ranch, was showing signs of recovery. The fields were green again, the chickens were laying, and Judith had planted a small vegetable garden that was thriving under her care. Lucas had settled into life on the ranch as if he had always belonged there. He had a natural instinct for the land and the animals, and under his management, they had acquired a small herd of cattle and 2 more horses. They weren't rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Their courtship had progressed with the same steady reliability that characterized Lucas himself. Every evening, he would bring Judith wildflowers or small gifts he'd carved from wood during quiet moments. They would sit together on the porch, talking about their day and making plans for their future. Judith found herself falling deeply in love with him, in a way that was different from what she had shared with Thomas. This love was quieter, more mature, built on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect rather than the passionate whirlwind of her first marriage. As Christmas approached, the weather turned bitterly cold. A blizzard swept through the region, confining them to the house for 3 days. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat before the fire, Lucas took Judith's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "We've been living together these past months, building this life together, but we never made it official." Judith smiled. "Are you asking me to marry you, Lucas Lawson?" "I suppose I am," he chuckled, reaching into his pocket. "I had something more romantic planned, but this feels right." He pulled out a simple silver ring. "It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Tears filled Judith's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like that very much." They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small church in Redemption. The town had turned out for the occasion, curious to see the widow Evans wed again so soon after her husband's death. But as Judith walked down the aisle toward Lucas, she found she didn't care what anyone thought. She knew in her heart that Thomas would approve of the man who had saved not just her ranch, but her spirit as well. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. The ranch prospered under their joint care, and they began to build a reputation for fair dealings and quality livestock. Lucas's experience with various cattle outfits proved invaluable as they expanded their herd, and Judith's careful management of their finances kept them stable through market fluctuations. In the spring of 1880, Judith discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought both joy and anxiety at 30. She was considered somewhat old for a first pregnancy, and the nearest doctor was in Denver, a journey of several days. Lucas became even more protective, insisting on hiring a young cowhand named Ethan to help with the heavy work around the ranch. Judith tolerated his fussing with good humor, secretly touched by his concern. Their son, Samuel Thomas Lawson, was born on a crisp October morning with the help of the town midwife. He had Lucas's sandy hair and Judith's blue eyes, and both parents were instantly besotted. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling his son with hands that seemed too large for such a delicate task. "Absolutely perfect." Life settled into a new routine with Samuel at its center. The ranch continued to thrive, and they were able to hire additional help, giving them more time to enjoy their growing family. Samuel was a happy, curious child who followed Lucas around the ranch from the moment he could walk, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle like a sponge. When Samuel was 3, Judith gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor Mary, after both their mothers. Unlike her boisterous brother, Eleanor was a quiet, thoughtful child who preferred books to horses and spent hours watching Judith cook or sew with solemn attention. The years passed in the rhythm of seasons: planting and harvest, calving and branding, winters huddled around the fire telling stories, summers swimming in the creek that ran through their property. The house that had once felt so empty to Judith now rang with laughter and the patter of small feet. Not that life was without its challenges. The winter of 1885 was particularly harsh, and they lost several cattle to the cold. A dispute over water rights with a neighboring rancher led to tense moments before Lucas's diplomatic skills resolved the situation. And always, there was the unpredictable nature of ranching itself: drought years and flood years, market prices that rose and fell with little warning. But through it all, Judith and Lucas faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. They complemented each other perfectly: Lucas's practical experience balancing Judith's careful planning, her attention to detail matching his big-picture thinking. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel and Eleanor play in the yard, Lucas took Judith's hand. "Do you ever think about that first day I rode up here?" he asked. "How different things might have been if I hadn't heard about Thomas in town?" Judith leaned her head against his shoulder. "I try not to. I was so close to giving up that day if you hadn't come when you did." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think I was meant to find you. All those years wandering, taking jobs here and there, I was just making my way to you. And I was waiting, even when I didn't know it," Judith replied softly. As the children grew, so did the ranch. By 1890, the Evans-Lawson spread was one of the most respected in the county. They had built a new, larger house to accommodate their growing family. Eleanor had been joined by twin brothers, James and William, in 1888, and had expanded their operations to include a small orchard and beehives, Judith's special projects. Samuel, now 10, was showing all signs of becoming an excellent horseman and had his father's natural way with animals. Eleanor, at 7, was already helping Judith with household accounts, displaying a surprising head for figures. The twins were still too young for real responsibilities, but at 2 years old, they managed to create enough mischief for 10 children. Lucas had changed over the years, the restless cowhand becoming a settled rancher with deep roots in the community. He served on the town council, helped organize the yearly cattle drive, and was known for his fairness in business dealings. The scar above his eyebrow had been joined by others, marks of a life lived fully in a challenging land, and strands of gray now threaded through his sandy hair. But his eyes still held the same kindness that had first drawn Judith to him. Judith, too, had transformed from the desperate widow to a confident ranch wife and mother. She had finally taken up drawing again, sketching the landscape and her children in quiet moments. Her work had even attracted attention from a gallery owner in Denver who had passed through redemption, though she had declined his offer to display her pieces, preferring to keep them within the family. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Judith with a trip to San Francisco, something she had always dreamed of but never expected to experience. They left the children in the capable hands of their foreman's wife for 2 weeks and journeyed west by train. San Francisco dazzled them with its hills and harbor, its bustling markets and elegant restaurants. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and walked along the waterfront hand in hand like newlyweds. For Judith, who had never traveled farther than Denver, the city was a revelation both exciting and overwhelming. On their last night, as they stood looking out over the bay, Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Are you sad to be going home tomorrow?" he asked. Judith considered the question. "It's been wonderful," she said honestly, "like a dream, but no, I'm not sad. Our real life is waiting for us, the children, the ranch. That's where we belong." Lucas tightened his embrace. "I feel the same. Though I wouldn't mind bringing you back here someday when the children are older." "I'd like that," Judith smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for this gift, Lucas, not just the trip, but everything, our home, our family, these years together." "You're the gift, Judith," he said, the sincerity in his voice making her heart swell. "That day I rode up to your ranch, I was just planning to pay my respects and move on. I never expected to find my future sitting at that table." They returned home renewed, ready to face the challenges of ranching life once more. The 1890s brought changes to Colorado as the frontier era gave way to more settled times. The railroad expanded, bringing new markets for their cattle and easier access to goods they once had to do without. Electricity came to redemption in 1895, though it would be several more years before it reached their ranch. Samuel left for college in Denver in 1898, the first Lawson to pursue higher education. His departure was difficult for Lucas, who had imagined his son taking over the ranch someday, but he supported the boy's decision to study engineering. Eleanor surprised them all by declaring her intention to become a teacher, enrolling in the normal school in Colorado Springs in 1900. The twins, now 12, remained at home, showing every sign of being interested in ranching. James had his father's way with horses, while William had developed a keen interest in the business side of their operation. They bickered constantly but were inseparable, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses in a way that reminded Judith of her relationship with Lucas. As the new century dawned, bringing with it automobiles and telephones and countless other innovations, Judith sometimes marveled at how much the world had changed since that desperate day in 1878, when she had sat alone at her table, hunger gnawing at her stomach and despair clouding her future. On a warm September afternoon in 1903, as Judith and Lucas sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, a daily ritual they had maintained through 24 years of marriage, she shared this thought with him. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden up that day?" She asked, her hand finding his as it always did. Lucas, now in his late 50s with fully gray hair but the same kind eyes, squeezed her fingers. "I know exactly what would have happened," he said confidently. "I would have found you somehow, if not that day, then another." "How can you be so sure?" Judith asked, smiling at his certainty. Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious despite the smile lines around his eyes. "Because some things are meant to be, Judith. You and me, this ranch, our family, it was all written long before we knew it. I was always going to set bread and my heart before you at that table, and you were always going to make room for me in your life. When did you get so philosophical?" she teased, though his words touched her deeply. "Must be old age," he chuckled. "Or maybe it's just having the time to look back and see the pattern of things." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors Judith had seen on that long-ago evening when Lucas had first suggested they might have a future together, she leaned her head against his shoulder and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had brought bread and hope to her empty table, and in doing so, had filled her life with love.